I remember when I started riding that piaffe was one of those things that really inspired me and I really wanted to get as soon as possible.
Yeah, I remember myself also like dreaming about that one day I will do piaffe. Hello and welcome to our first Together talk. We decided to talk this first talk about piaffe. We chose piaffe because it's a topic that I think everyone is interested in and topic that can inspire us, can help us to get better or to give us an idea where we are heading.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I started riding and started to get more into dressage, that piaffe was one of those things, one of those gaits that really inspired me and I really wanted to get as soon as possible. So
yeah, I remember myself also like dreaming about that one day I will do piaffe and it will be like because I think normally in the past, I think people thought that for piaffe you have to have dressage horse like breed. And the second was that everyone would tell you about piaffe that it's the main goal of dressage is piaffe, that it's like the highest of the highest, top of the top, which is not true. But
no, exactly. Yeah. I think it depends a little bit maybe on the environment you are riding in. So, like school jumps kind of fit into that category.
Yeah, but I think for normal people, like 10, 15 years ago, school jumps was something that, the Spanish riding school did, and that was it.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I think more and more people tend to get there and actually do it. So you can see it also somewhere else, not only in the riding schools.
Yeah, so piaffe is definitely one of those very big milestones to get. And I think what for me was interesting is that once I got more towards piaffe, I kind of realized that the idea of that you at one time you just get piaffe and then you're done was not really how it worked.
Yeah, exactly.
What I like to say to people maybe that are trying to work towards piaffe or maybe are dreaming towards piaffe, I think is that it is something that you will, at some point, you will get 1 or 2 steps in piaffe, and then you will realize that, well, you will have to improve the piaffe also over time, and that can take years.
Yeah, and I think when you get to the point where you realize that piaffe is not something you one day just get, but that it's like slow process of building up exercises and getting it better and better and eventually getting one step that is somehow in the direction and then building it up. When you realize that it's something you build up, it kind of makes you move more forward. And I think once you realize that, everything gets much easier, much more simple. Because, when you think about it as you don't have it and then suddenly you get it, it feels like magic. But when you break it down to these little steps, you can see how your riding can lead there. And I think that's
for sure.
That's important.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to realize. And also something I realized over time when I did all of these exercises, a lot of people try to jump from a very simple basis, some side movements in walk and some side movements in trot, all the way to piaffe, which is a very big jump. If you have a horse that is very muscular and quite talented in this kind of stuff, then it is easier to get the piaffe out of that horse if you know what you're doing. But if you have a horse that might not be that muscular and not used to these kind of movements, then you need something else to build those muscles up. And so that's why I think that side movements in trot, in squares or in circles or in pirouettes kind of comes into play.
So when we talk about how to get there, okay, we know that probably it will be something with trot. We know that it will be probably something with side movements, but how we would get there? From my experience, when I think back to all the books I've read about it, it was different approaches that people would get it from backing up, that it's going forward and backing up, forward, backing up. At some point you get that trot on a place, which leads then to piaffe and slowly build it from there, or that it is something you can get through shoulder in. So what's your idea of getting it?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think there's different approaches and different things that can help. And I think what is so tricky about it is that you kind of need to know what to do in the right moment. And you need quite some timing also, I think, to do the aids in the right time, which is a little bit more tricky than exercises like a shoulder in like walk or trot on a straight line. Yeah, I think that plays a big role into it.
And do you think that you can get it even if you never sat on a horse that can do it? Because, I came from a place where I sat on some horses that could do it, maybe not in the greatest way, but they did it. And it helped me a lot to know what I'm looking for. But do you think you can get it also?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've taught people to do it. And, not a perfect piaffe, but that's not the point. I think when we're talking about getting piaffe, we are talking about the first few steps. So if your teacher kind of knows what they're doing and knows how to guide you through the process, I think it's possible. It's harder, of course, but it's harder if you don't really have the timing yet, or that you have to practice a little bit more, or so that your teacher can give you the tools of what to do in what moment. Might say, here you use a bit leg, here we go some backwards, or here we do some trot or something like this. And I think that's something that will help you tremendously to get it, because if you don't have a teacher and you're trying on your own, it's going to be quite tricky. I'm not saying impossible, but it's going to be harder because you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. I think here getting it is also a big question about how strong the horse is, how talented the horse is, because I know horses that you can basically sit on, ride a little bit, and you can kind of get it. And then you have horses like Utah, for instance, who is just, we are working on it for, half a year or something. And it's still very hard to get the rhythm. He finds it very tricky.
So the conformation of the horse can play a big role. I think that's true. And also, we're talking about building muscles. I think youth is a good example, because we spent some year or year and a half to build those muscles up. And it's better, but his butt muscles are still his weak point, I think.
Yeah, true. And also, what was for me big aha moment was when you rode him and I rode him, and when I compared it, when I ride him, I can get in the direction of piaffe, I can get some piaffe, but when you ride him, he can't, because you're heavier, and also that plays a role. Like if you have a horse that's weaker and you are heavier rider, then it might take even longer than when you are light rider and you have strong horse.
For sure, yeah. And especially for the horse, it's trickier, and it will take longer to build up those muscles, especially when you come from always no muscles. And the conformation itself, it depends if the horse has quite long hind legs, like Utah has, or like quite a long back. Then it's also some disadvantages that play a role into that. It might affect what kind of piaffe you will get in the end if you work on it for years. I think that piaffe might not look as nice as a horse that is super well built and very muscular. But that's not the point of dressage, I think.
That's true.
Not trying to claim that.
And when we talk about mistakes you can commonly see in piaffe, what would it be?
Yeah, there's some common ones. I think the goal of a piaffe is to get the horse on the hind legs. So one very common one is when the front legs go more under the horse and the horse stands more on the front legs. You can kind of see that the front legs don't come up as much from the ground. So the horse is kind of doing a handstand a little bit, like some people would say it, and hopping with the hind legs.
Yeah, I mean, when I was evaluating the dressage video 2 days ago, what you can see often is jumping from like side to side. The piaffe is not like grounded, but it's more like
it's also related.
Right.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you get this like in between step of the hind leg where the tip of the toe of the hoof touches the ground at the point where it should be still in the air.
Yeah, some circular motion in the air of the hoofs is quite common. And these are the common mistakes we see in a little bit more dressage competitions, I would say. And it is a little bit related to how much you hold the horse back with the reins, and then try to keep the energy with the legs. Although, like it depends also a little bit on the horse. Like my horse, Kalle, he has also a little bit more trouble with the front. So because he has a steep shoulder, so it's harder to work with that. Like the hind legs are quite strong. He can do a lot of misère and stuff like that. Also with me, but getting the front right is always the challenge, I think. So also something we try
which
to
is
improve.
also funny thing to notice. That our horses are complete opposites in this.
No.
That with Jute, I'm quite fine with front, but I fight the back, and you fight the front, and you have the back. Can we like glue them together?
Yeah, not in the wrong way. I do.
Yeah.
No, and it's quite common to see that in breeds also. It's a little bit on average, but in my experience, PREs have a little bit less problems with the front, and Lusitanos have a little bit less problems with the back. And then you have all the other breeds, of course. It's not only Iberians that people ride.
We should remind ourselves of that.
No, like warmbloods can have very nice piaffe.
Like impressive.
Yeah, for sure.
Big piaffe.
I think if we go back a little bit, like how to get it, reminding yourself of that piaffe is a movement on the place, but it's bending the hind leg so much that it allows the movement to be in a place and to kind of collect the horse so much that it can be on the place, right? So it's not about keeping the horse on the place with the reins necessarily, but it's about building the trot up and building the collection up, which is why these preparatory exercises are so important. Of like the trot side movements on the square and stuff like this, because it allows the horse to be more on the place while keeping the trot.
Yeah, in very short periods of time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's easier.
Yeah, so that's quite important. And then the backwards is usually used to get the horse a little bit more on the haunches. It depends on how you use the backwards. I think it's important to not rush backwards, not have big strides backwards, stuff like this. Yeah, to keep the horse more together while doing the backwards, and sometimes an upward half halt with the reins during backwards can help. So and then you have a transition from trot also, which can also really help, especially when you feel that the horse is more stuck on the place and he doesn't really lift the front, and the front legs are more under the horse. That's also just stuff that happens when you try to get piaffe. I have to mention that, I think, because if you do piaffe at home, it will be a bad piaffe the first time, but that's fine. Because, of course, you have to practice it.
And so we know that the hind leg that's weight bearing in piaffe in the moment should be bended, not straight, which you commonly see, straight hind legs. Sure. And I think people tend to look at the other hind leg that's in the air and they want it to be high, to be very much up, which, like, in my opinion, that actually the more loaded the butt is, then the harder it is to even lift the leg. So I would expect it to be even less up than...
Yeah, especially in the beginning, it can be hard for the horse to lift the leg. And that's something you commonly see, is that you get some pesade or levade or misère or something with both hind legs involved, where the horse bends both hind legs, because it's kind of easier for the horse to be on both hind legs rather than be on one. And the height of the other leg, the leg in the air, it's important, but it's later important. So in the beginning, a little bit lazy piaffe, where the other hind leg is not lifted as much. It's not too bad, because you work on diagonalization, you work on some collection. So expression, how you would commonly refer to it as like how big the piaffe looks, it's not as big of a topic, especially in the beginning. And I think also there's a limit to that. So there is variance, but if you lift it too high, then the horse gets on the front.
Well, which leads me to the question I had before. And that's when you have the piaffe pirouette.
Yeah.
That's something you can see in dressage tests nowadays. You know, I read about it, that then it's not piaffe, that it's more passage. You know, what's piaffe for you? Is it something just on a place, or is it when you want to do the pirouette in piaffe, let's say piaffe, let's call it piaffe, then you have to put more weight on front? No. Like, not that there will be more weight, but it's much harder to keep it on the hind legs because you turn.
For sure, yeah. So it will be harder, I think, to get weight on hind legs. In terms of what you call piaffe, I think is a good question. Like, I think historically, of course, there was a distinction made between piaffe and passage, and basically piaffe was everything on the place and passage was everything else. And that's a historical view. I think nowadays, if we look at how a good piaffe pirouette should look, like an ideal piaffe pirouette, it looks quite different to the passage we do nowadays. I think because that is a more elevated gait. It covers more ground. It's a little bit bouncy. You know, there's some bouncy quality to that. And you can say like, okay, that's a different kind of passage or something like that.
Yeah, of course. When we talk about classical riding and Olympic riding, then we can even have a discussion about, can we even compare these exercises?
I think so. Like, I think, you know, the horse isn't that different, of course. There's difference in a modern warm blood and a maybe like 16th century Italian horse, but it's still a horse. And so the movement pattern is limited.
Yeah, but my point was whether we can compare it because people look for quality at different places.
Of course, yeah.
And then some passage we can see in dressage rings, at dressage competitions. And the passage you want from some historical point of view, is it...
It's different, like one is more collected, one is more bouncy, of course, yeah. I think it's good to realize that both could be passage or could be passage to some definition, and that you can do both variants, that there's nothing wrong to do passage different as long as it makes sense and the horse isn't uncomfortable, and that's of course a different discussion, but doing it a little bit more forward to the limits that you put on it, but it's ethical and good for the horse.
Because for me personally, passage, piaffe means collection. And from my perspective, that's something lacking in most of the piaffes and passages I can see in dressage competitions.
I think so. But that's true. But the question is what is the ideal? Of course, that's also the stuff that gets scored high. So maybe that's the ideal. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little bit definition question. And if we say like, okay, if you would ask me personally, is it a pirouette, a piaffe? I would say, yeah, close enough, probably. I mean, the weight will come more on the front, of course, and the horse has to turn, and so the weight will be alternating on one front, and it's a little bit tricky to get the horse proper to not fall too much on the front in that movement. Of course, then we get into more definition questions, like, okay, if you say that is a piaffe pirouette, is a shoulder-in pirouette in trot, which is very collected, is that also a piaffe pirouette? Or is like a travers pirouette in trot very collected? Is that just not the same? Probably.
I would say that the point you turn around is somewhere a little bit different. That, in piaffe, pirouette, I would say that the pole you turn around is going through the rider, if you imagine.
Oh, okay, so it's in the middle. Oh, okay.
It's in the middle.
Fair enough.
When it's shoulder in, it's more around like front
the shoulder
leg.
Yeah.
And when you have travers, it's more around the hind leg.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, sorry, then I didn't really understand your point. Yeah, I think in terms of turning around the rider, turning around the middle point, then I would definitely call it piaffe. It's close enough to the piaffe movement that I would say like, of course it's moving, but it's like the moving piaffe. I don't know.
Then it's passage.
There's passage. Yeah, but you're not moving forward, so like, I don't know. I think one question we also discussed before was a little bit why to do it in the first place.
Well, for me, building up muscles, getting my horse stronger, improving the movement itself of the horse.
Yeah, and I think it's a good muscle builder for sure. Like what I experienced myself was that piaffe and Mazère was definitely the stuff that really was a hard exercise, but put the most muscle on the horse. Yeah. Because also you bend the hind leg more, and well, it's a little bit debatable, but from human physiology studies, I think we have some evidence that stretched positions kind of grow more muscle. And not always the case. That stretched positions or training in the whole range of motion of a joint is a good thing. Because otherwise, if the leg is straight, then the muscle isn't really working the ones you want to work. And it's easier to keep the leg more straight in the trot. I don't think it's necessary.
No.
For anyone to do it. Like.
I think it's good, maybe not goal per se, but some peak you can go towards to. And, it doesn't matter that you don't get there, but it's just like having that picture in your head as like, the goal and just trying to get closer and closer to it is enough. And if it means that you will stop at shoulder in on a circle or square in quarter pirouettes, like that's completely fine. Yeah,
that's a good point. Like I never really thought about it too much, but I think when you say that, it might be a good thing that you want to get to piaffe at some point, because it's incredibly motivating, I think, for a rider.
I think it's just not getting too stuck in it. Like, I have to get there and get there as quickly as possible. Yeah. No, it's just, it would be fun to get there, but it's like when you do a sport and you are like thinking about Olympics or something, and you won't probably get there, but it's good goal.
Something good to work towards. Yeah, and of course you have to learn as a rider that it's fine if it's a day that is going worse, or that you feel like you're not really making progress for a longer period of time, or that it's very hard to do, and that's all normal, I think. And stuff you have to get over, but long term, I think it was a very good thing that I had things like piaffe to work towards, because it really made me motivated and wanting to learn and wanting to ride it and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just about not losing the overall picture of where you and your horse are, so you don't get into the point where you just push the horse too much, because that's what I tend to do also when I focus on something. I keep repeating it over and over again, and at some point it's like, I maybe should have left it.
Likewise, I still make that mistake. Maybe even more than when I started, I don't know. I try to learn from it. Sometimes it just comes up. It happens, and I think it's important to think about that and know that it can happen. And so one of those rules of thumb I've used was, when you have the feeling that you want to do it once more, always stop. That really helped me, because like every time I want to do it once more, it always went worse. So trust me on that. Just stop. It's better. It's better for everyone.
Do you think you have to teach the piaffe in hand first?
I think it will help a lot. I don't think you have to teach it necessarily. I think, like with a lot of movements, I think horses intuitively kind of know what to do. They just don't know what you want. Right? Like we've all seen excited horses in the pasture. Most of them do some piaffe movement or something. And the hard thing is to, one, explain that as a human to a horse that you want that. It's a very high energy state. So a lot of horses kind of freak out in the beginning because they have so much energy and they have to stay calm. which is new for them, I think. And another thing is trying to get that in the saddle, because it's a lot more weight that the horse has to get used to.
Harder.
And it's much, much harder than just on the ground, for sure. And we also want it proper, right? Like in the pasture, sometimes it might be with a tense-up back, or with like a little bit straight hind leg, or with the front leg a little bit under.
Yeah.
And so we want some.
We have very specific idea of what we want.
Exactly. Yeah, and that can be quite hard to kind of reach with you also on top of it. But like, I think in-hand work really helps a lot, because you're not sitting on the horse. I don't think it's necessary, but I've used in-hand work, and actually what we discussed a little bit Carlos piaffe lately, and we were thinking of doing more in-hand work because it might help him to get even more bend in the haunches and actually a bit more freedom in the front. So sometimes when you have specific problems, you can really fix it. I think I don't know what your experience is with teaching piaffe in hand, but it's very hard to control yourself, I think. If you want it, it's very easy to keep the horse quite on edge or stressed or making mistakes in that. And that's very hard, I think, in hand. It's something that everyone at least once will come across in their...
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I prefer to do it from the saddle because it just feels easier and more intuitive. But I'm more of a rider in that sense.
I think in hand and also in the saddle, I think two things are probably more important than how to do it technically. I think one is try to use as little aids as possible. And it's very easy to get too many aids at once.
Yeah.
Super easy. And in the beginning, a very few aids might not do much with the horse. And that might be a little bit... You might see that and be like, yeah, but I have to add more pressure. But I'd rather keep it less in the aids. So also on the ground. Exactly. On the ground, I would like to tap and wait a few seconds for a reaction, like 2 or something. And then if the horse doesn't react, you tap again. But meanwhile, you keep the whip pointed down. And that's hard, I think. Also something to learn. And so that's one thing, because it's kind of preventing the horse from becoming too stressed in it. And the second thing is to, especially when you get better at this, to consider how the horse is feeling.
Yeah, that's another discussion about how the horse feels. And because I know a lot of people that can teach piaffe quite quickly, but the stress it costs the horse is very high. And for me personally, then that's not the way I would like to do it, because I want my horse to be fine with it as much as possible.
I think the cause of this thinking we got into lately, I think, was when we went to Portugal and we saw some horses being quite fine, like physically, I would say. Like, the seat of the rider was almost perfect, and the aids were good, and like overall the training itself, at least the public visible training was fine, but mentally the horses were shut off.
Yeah.
And that was a result of them being so strict with the aids. Like when the horse would make any mistake, the aid would come immediately and correct the horse. And that's not what I want. And that I think really made us think, how much is too much? And you begin to doubt almost your own stuff you do with horses, because it's so impactful, I think.
Yeah, and it's not. Or there are people that are very strict, they are hard on horses, so everyone sees it. But this is a little bit of a process, and constantly shaping it and making it tighter and tighter, so the horse at some point just gives up. That the young horses weren't shut off, but you could see that the training was so intense for the horse that it gradually went into this stage of just giving up and just doing mechanically what people want. And that's not something you want.
like you said, it was a little bit hard to see for us what was happening, I think, with the horse, because like we could see the horse not being fine with it, but to understand what the rider was doing and what effect that had was long term was hard to see, because it's very proficient. You know, the aids are not big, the aids are very small, but they're very quick. So it might be a very slight touch of the whip, a little bit slight hit of the whip, but it is very quick. And I think that's the problem, that it's always when the horse makes a mistake, there's immediately correction. Yeah. And it's very quick.
And what I missed in it also a little bit was that reward of it was better.
For
but
sure.
There was this constant pressure of like, it has to be perfect.
Yeah.
And just pushing the horse to do it perfect and again and again. And there wasn't like, oh, it was better, so good. Yeah. And in my opinion, that plays a role in it.
For sure. There was a release at the end, which was, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
But that's not a reward. That's just okay, we're done. Like putting stress on you. Tomorrow again. Yeah. And I think you can really see that in horses, and especially the older horses. And so I would just like to say that to people with piaffe also, like the better you get, the more you should watch out for that. Because you get more quick in your reactions. You know kind of what to do, which aid, where. And you have to be careful to get into this pattern of constantly correcting the horse. Don't let this discourage you from doing piaffe. I think it's a really good thing to do, and as long as you do it soft enough and with respect enough for the horse, it can be done in such a way. I've seen a lot of people doing a very nice piaffe and also teaching it very nicely. And it can be done properly.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. Yeah, and just listen to your horse and it will be fine. I think most of our listeners won't be the type of people that would fall for these kind of mistakes anyway too much. Yeah, if you have respect for the horse, and keep that in mind, and also think about how the horse feels. Yeah. It should be fine.
Okay. Thank you for listening. We will be looking forward to next time.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.